Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this week's open office hours. My name is Brian Doyle, and I am, as always, kind of your coach for the week. I want to thank everybody for joining. I see a lot of new names coming into the system today. So for those of you that are new, I want to thank you for stopping on by. We do these coachings every Tuesday, barring travel, at 3 p.m. Eastern, and these are recorded and placed up into the university. So certainly if you're a regular attendee and you miss a session, go check out the university. We always post these videos there. Today, we're going to continue in our conversations around, compliance, risk management, and some of the concerns that we have around that. And we're going to dive in a little bit into our brand new third-party risk management module that we soft launched last week. We'll be really hitting the market with as you see over the next couple of months. Again, this is a continuation of what we've been learning from a lot of our customers, in addition to the traditional business reviews that we've been known for at VCIO Toolbox. We're seeing a real push to where a lot of the emerging MSPs, the ones that are in growth mode, are starting to really build out advisory practices with their customers and really helping guide them not only on kind of day-to-day operations and where they need to go with their roadmaps, and certainly our big piece, the strategic plans that we work with our customers, but also really delving in and building these CISO programs or supporting compliance as a service programs with regular compliance reviews and risk reviews for our customers. So one of our new additions to the GRC portfolio is third-party risk management module. Big picture, it operates very similarly, and we'll show you that more so to what GRC does, but it really gives you an opportunity to look at the downstream impact for your customers and get engaged with some of the vendors that they might be working with. Hint, hint, that can also be a prospecting tool. But putting that aside, let's talk about some of the challenges and opportunities facing us as we think a little bit about vendor or supplier risk. And vendors or suppliers can be direct vendor suppliers to ourselves. It can also be the ones that we're managing for our customers. So one of the things that we know is there are a number of things that we have to take into consideration, or oftentimes we overlook when thinking about our vendor landscape. How often do you really sit down and consider the risk of the vendors and suppliers you might be doing business with? And I'm not talking just IT vendors. I'm talking vendors really in any space. For example, a number of years ago, and I can't use them by name, but you can figure out who this is very easily. We used to do a lot of work for the House of the Mouse down in Orlando. And one of the things that was brought to our attention when we were working is they wanted to put in kind of a business continuity plan and understand and assess the vendor risk for bringing the supplies to the resorts. The situation they ran into one day was their top primary vendor for orange juice had a rollover on the way to supporting the hotels with that day's orange juice supplies. They didn't have a backup vendor, and thus they weren't able to give customers orange juice. And you can imagine a place like that has their hotels where right out the window of the hotels, you could see oranges growing on the trees in their yard. Took it on the chin a little bit that day that they couldn't supply what Florida was known for. So the point is, all of our vendors have risk. Some of it is technical based, some of it's not technical based. I'm not saying we're going out there and now being risk managers for everything, but you really got to understand kind of what is the downstream connection. Because if you have a HIPAA client, let's say, and that HIPAA client is working with a third-party vendor that manufactures medical devices, but in order to do so, they're giving patient information to that device manufacturer, even though there's not really a transaction going on, in a true tech sense, other than maybe alerting them that it's time to send the supplies, there's still data that's being shared sensitively across, a couple of customers. So we really got to understand where the risk lives with a customer. The other thing we got to think about is our customers don't know what to ask. Not necessarily do they understand. Now I'll flip to the technical vendor on what things they should be looking for. Is there a certification? Is there a skill set? Is there, standard operating procedures and policies they should be following? And that's where we come in and we can help educate them and help guide them as they assess new vendors coming into their portfolio. We also don't look across the entire supply chain, sometimes even for our own business, right? Who are the people we're doing business with, and what do we know about how they handle data, how they're engaging with their vendors, who their vendors are? And this gives us an opportunity to talk a little bit deeper. I mentioned this already. We don't know what to ask of a vendor, but when I say what do we ask of a vendor at this stage, it's what are the questions that we need to extract and bring in this information, and then how can we ask them to improve? Do we have to put conditions of our contract to it? Do we have to really start working with the vendor to help them succeed? Let's say a vendor doesn't have security awareness training, and that's something that you deem critical. Can you build a clause into their contract that they have to implement it during a period of time? Or maybe, there's a cancellation clause, or maybe there's a discount clause because they're not handling the data as well as you should be. So, there could be some return on any open risk that these customers leave in play. And the other thing is we all look at all vendors sometimes as equal. Not all the vendors we do business with have the same data profile that they're supporting across everywhere. I'm sure your marketing tools don't hold the same information that your PSA does, right? So when we look at those vendors, we have to look at the inherent risk of the vendor and what it really means to our business should they get breached. And then we also have to look at the maturity of our vendor in this process. So we're going to discuss that a little bit more as we go through today. Now, and the big one, checking for changes. This is something a lot of us are even guilty of in our own businesses. We do a background check when we're hiring people, but are we doing background checks on some prescribed period, as an example? So one of the things that we need to look for is changes in the way the technology is structured, changes in what the threats are that could be emerging, that could be impacting our supply chain. And of course, we've got changes in personnel that we have to think about, new people coming in, employees staying on. Has anything changed in that employee's personal life that hasn't been recorded here? If you got somebody under some deep financial stress who had their original background check and didn't have that problem, that could be something if you're selling financial software that you want to know, right? So this is just some of the things that we don't think about sometimes, but each one of these represents an opportunity for us to either get closer to our customer, educate them by being a leader, or potentially opening up a new revenue stream as we build our vCISO programs and really looking at vendor assessments as being part of that solutions package. So how do we get to know our customer? I think most of you on this call are familiar with the business canvas model found in BCIO Toolbox. If you're not, the business model canvas is a standard business modeling tool that is used in many MBA programs nationwide. And we saw that it really translated well to the technology sector. If you're looking at this for the first time, in the center of this canvas, you're seeing what's called the value proposition here. This is where we're really defining what the value proposition of that company is to the marketplace. In this case, just bear in mind, this was actually mapped out for an MSP. So when you look through this, you'll see that, a lot of things, think of your own MSP when you look at these areas. Over here on the right-hand side, it's really a go-to-market view of the customer. Who do they sell to? How do they generate revenue? What are their customer relationships? And tucked down here, we're talking about sales channels. That area is really good for innovation, growth, things like that. The left side is where we get really into the security and risk discussion more so. Here, we're really mapping out the operations that support the go-to-market endeavors of the customer. We're looking at the activities they do, like, in the MSP case, support, procurement, architecture, design, and delivery as an example. We're looking at the key resources they have, human, intellectual property, potentially systems they use. You'll see over there, a big part of this is the partnerships, which include vendors, suppliers, peer groups you're a part of, things like that. That is an area of risk right there, and something that we've seen with some of our more mature MSPs that have really built out nice vCISO programs. They're using this business canvas to understand the customer, but also identify the gaps in security and thus the doors to risk that don't necessarily show up when they're conducting a traditional CIS assessment or doing a QBR or really engaging with their customer. You may find out things that you didn't know about your customer, like they've got an outsourced call center that they're using let's use a doctor's office as an example. They've got an outsourced call center that's doing appointment confirmations. These folks have access to at least, the name, phone number, and type of ailment that they may have in order to make their phone calls. But a lot of times these outsourced companies are brought into a doctor's office without anybody vetting. Do they have security awareness training inside their business and train the customers to be on the lookout for things that look abnormal? Do they do any social engineering experiments to really make sure that these agents on the other end of the phone cannot be talked into giving up information? They could be calling the house of a patient, but getting somebody else on the phone that shouldn't have any intimate knowledge of what's happening to that patient. So that have they had that kind of experimentation done? And certainly there needs to be a vendor risk assessment, because if you're identifying that there's holes like that in the process, we want to do that risk assessment with that vendor. Same with, over where it says partnerships. You're going to see suppliers that sit outside the technology space, but there might be technology or at least data transfer. And we want to know how that data is handled. So I encourage you, if you haven't been using the business model canvas and you're starting on security consulting, this is a great tool to even sit down with your customer, basically to say to them, before we can even suggest what you should be doing from a security program, we got to understand the landscape of how you operate at a more intimate level than we do today, and map that out within the business model canvas, and it'll start getting you thinking differently about how to approach the engagement. Obviously, there's advantages for those of you using it for a QBR with team transition, and certainly referral opportunity and partnerships and customer segments. But we're seeing a real strong adoption of this process with our security-led attendees. And then when I come down into the that's a little prize for you guys later. But now let's go into the system here. So within our system, our third-party risk management will show up within your GRC module. Now, third-party is an add-on to GRC. Not all MSPs require the third-party assessment tool. So to keep our prices, on the lower end of things for folks that want to subscribe to just straight GRC, we've decided not to force it upon you as part of that subscription and hold it out as an optional item for those that want to engage. We'll get into the commercials of, the TPRM module a little bit later, but just so you know, we're basically, the way the subscriptions work are tier-based, just like our standard GRC. We go on the estimation that every company you're going to measure is going to have roughly 10 vendors that you want to assess as well. So if you're a GRC 5 supplier or a subscriber and you want to bring in third-party management, you would subscribe to the bundle that would have up to 50 companies. We don't care if they align one for one with those customers. It's a grouping. In terms of accessing TPRM, though, and let's get more into the discussion around TPRM, we come over here to where it says third party. Now, this is handling the global side of TPRM. When I come in here, I've got a dashboard. Inside this dashboard, I'm able to see my overall GRC assessment solution, my creation trends, what types of templates I'm using. When I get down here, I'm really starting to assess my vendor types, my supplier types, see what my mix of suppliers are, what my risk levels are across each category, and then the inherent risk for those third parties as well. So it really gives us an opportunity to kind of get an at-a-glance view of our vendor community. We can see up here what's been applied, what's been approved, and then we do see overall metrics here as well. In this third-party area here, we can build global suppliers and global vendors for risk assessment. So let's just say, for argument's sake, we're going to do a risk assessment with Microsoft or Azure, let's say, right? And they've got, they've got a standard vendor response that they might do there, and they might be willing to share. Well, this might be something that I want to share across all customers. So I could set up a profile here. I'm just going to put in some garbage data to set up the profile. And then I come down here, and with every vendor, I have an opportunity to rate what I feel their maturity as a vendor is. Obviously, we're not going to expect the same level of technological maturity from I'll use the orange supplier that, again, as an example, versus, our ERP software. So we can really, measure here. Maturity could be a little bit subjective and interpretive, but what you look at it as the maturity of that business and their ability to handle putting in a cybersecurity program. The inherent risk is really where we're recognizing what this potential risk is to the business. If I bring this company in, is this a big exposure, medium exposure, low exposure? and we can rate what that exposure level looks like to us. And then if we have this vendor as an approved vendor, we can tag it here. Now, as I put this one into the global column, oh, and I may have just discovered a bug in our new software here, as I'm having a challenge creating it. Well, I will say this, it will go into my global supplier column, and then I can conduct my risk assessment, but I can also attach any of my global suppliers to any company. And I apologize for the snafu. I will have to take a look at that. Coming into the customer segment, though, when you come in here, you're going to notice some new icons in your dashboard if you're TPRM. You can now view your individual vendors and suppliers. Now, I've built a couple vendors here for this particular customer, and you'll see that they're listed here as well. You'll see that we've got XYZ Co. and ABC LLC Co. So here, what we've done is they're both approved vendors. We have our creation dates, the vendor types, their risk score, their inherent risk, and then what their rating scores will start projecting up here. Now, when we come in here, we have supplied for you a vendor risk assessment. You can certainly import your own vendor risk assessment for use within compliance here. Or within vendor risk assessments. But in our risk assessment, we do a lot of data collection on the top half of the assessment. And then we go into a questionnaire mode. And this questionnaire is similar to some of the other assessments you've looked at. We're really trying to understand what the vendor has in place and really try to get an understanding of where the areas of risk might be. And we may even want to dictate to them a plan of action that we suggest to them to in order to remain our vendor. And we'll get into where we could potentially use this plan of action in a moment. But when you come in here, you'll see we've got questions like, do you have an information security plan and safeguards? And they can go into what that is. They, they could potentially supply evidence to you. And if you're not happy with what they can do, you can build a recommendation, which will become a plan of the action item. So this works very similarly to all the assessments in our system that you're already comfortable with, but it's really done at the vendor level. And then when you come into the plan of action, now you're able to see the action steps you'd like to propose to your customer and really give them a sense of some of the things you'd like them to do and when you'd like to see them done by. You might be able, now, obviously vendors are going to take your requests potentially with a grain of salt unless your contract is, lucrative enough to them that they want to go a little bit deeper. But what this really does do is gives them an idea of where they can improve their posture, and it may give you some negotiation play. So if you've got a vendor that you deem as kind of just a medium level inherent risk, and you know they're a little bit less mature, but they have gaps, potentially if they don't want to agree to these gaps and you're willing to take the risk on and still work with that vendor, you can use this to negotiate some better pricing or some other opportunities potentially on behalf of your customer. Now, I've shown you here that you can basically use our vendor risk assessment, but I do want to highlight that you can also add any other program into this as well. So let's say that we are working with a downstream vendor and we want them to prove out their 800-171 compliance. We can absolutely bring in a NIST assessment if that's what it requires, push that NIST assessment out to that user to answer. And that's another new feature that is in both GRC and TPRM, advanced delegation that came in with our release. So for many of you, you may recall that you're able to delegate, delegate different questions to different contacts. I'm actually going to make sure first that I go back and add a contact to this vendor, just so we have something to work with here. So I'll just put myself in. All right, so now I'm in the system. And now I can have an assessment delegated to me. So if I come in here, I now go back into my assessment. And now if I want to delegate individual questions for that person to answer, I can select that person here. But we have a new feature now where you can delegate the entire assessment. So if you're conducting a vendor risk assessment with your third-party customers, it's not something that you've got to sit with them and do data collection on. You can work with them to let them understand that an assessment's going to be coming their way, and then you can push it out to them. I've now assigned this entire assessment to myself. I can come in here to the delegation library and see that I've been assigned 110 standards to review. I've got my answer keys, my ability to put notes, and my ability to attach reference and evidence here, as well as confidence. And then I can send this out to the customer. And when I send it out to the customer, and I'll do this here to myself, you will see that they will then receive an email that asks them to collaborate. They will go click on this survey. And in this case, because I'm cross-signed in, they obviously wouldn't be signed into an instance already. They would get presented with the questions they need to answer and the ability to save them throughout the process. So this is, they would get, also I was already listed in the system, so I didn't get a temporary password, but your user would get a temporary password, a portal link. They would be able to go into that link. They would be able to start interacting with these questions. And then if they didn't finish them all, they can click save, come back to them. But as soon as they click save, those results will start populating your assessment with the customer's findings. Their response will get listed here, and any notes they provide you will be listed down below here. So if you do want to, basically import them into your review using their words verbatim or as a starting point, you can do so. So, the reality is we can really engage our third parties now into completing these assessments on their own, and we can delegate them out, or we can sit with them in engagement, whatever your customer prefers. And then, of course, those updates will come back into the dashboard. In this case, I haven't completed this yet, so let me go back to my vendor risk assessment. I'm going to update and close this assessment. And now when I go back into my dashboard here, I can actually look at the criteria for this vendor risk assessment. What risk has been satisfied, what risk we are accepting, what risk we've put into a POAM for that vendor. And we can look at the different time periods that we've done these and track their score history over time as we, maybe look at doing this every 6 months or a year with the vendor, depending on their criticality. And you'll see here, we can really get a sense of kind of where they sit within different areas of their assessment. So, we've got some dashboards to help us keep track at the individual customer level. And then, of course, when we come up here, we're able to look at our dashboards at a group level and see our different vendor supplier types and where they stand in terms of risk. So that's really kind of just a high-level view of how you can use our system for third-party risk. But more importantly, if you're really looking at building out a vCISO as a service program with your customer, a big part of the consultative side is really reaching out and guiding them, right? So, being a VSO is really making sure that the right tools are in place, conducting an internal risk assessment of the business to see where the gaps might be, making sure they have the right tools to support those gaps or help spec out those tools, reviewing all policy and making sure that the policies that are in place are in tune with what the customer's requirements are. If there are compliance requirements, you have to keep track of their control state and then be able to manage that part out. And then vendor assessments, and really managing their third-party landscape is a great add-on to that consultative fee because it's something that needs to be done. And most customers are not going to stay on top of it. So it really, if you're looking at some of the larger scale security firms out there, a big part of what they're doing in their programs is managing the customer's risk across the internal landscape and all parties and locations. So, consider those thoughts, as you look at that. We're going to be doing other trainings on third party, but again, in the simplest fashion, if you do subscribe to third party, you're going to come in, you're going to define any regular vendors that are exclusive to that customer. You can also define any global vendors and suppliers, although I got to fix that bug for you today. And then you're going to undertake an assessment for each one of them. And you can, bring those vendors into that assessment very easily by delegating it out. And that's going to help you generate a risk scorecard. You can report on that up here. And then you would ultimately be able to generate, an overall risk profile for your customer across all their vendors. So just to kind of give you a sense of this, you can look at your security and compliance report, see all the findings with all your updates here in your scorecard. If you want to see it with your plan of action, you can, show this to the customer, or the vendor and even show their plan of action items. I actually haven't put any into that plan of action here, but really, help help guide their vendors as well. And the nice part is some vendors are going to be very open to this, because what you do for one customer will help them improve for others. So it shouldn't be a contentious process. So with that, I'm going to close out our discussion today on kind of the introduction of third-party risk and how you can potentially engage with your customers and at least start a conversation, even if you don't take over the assessment portion today. With that, I open up the floor for any Q&A or comments. I actually forgot to open up the chat window earlier, but chat is now available if you want to pop anything into the chat area. Our Q&A is available. And as I always like to say at this stage of the event, it doesn't have to be about risk assessment. If you've got any questions at all, that you want answered today about VCIO Toolbox, the VCIO or vCISO processes, anything like that, now we're open for Ask Me Anything. In the meantime, I will share that we will be doing some more engagements around risk and profiling over the course of the next few weeks. Keep eyes out. This will go beyond our office hours as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have a closing promotion for those that want to jump on and start working with their customers on TPRM. We are right now giving 25% off of any TPRM package. So if you go to that URL down there, go VCIO Toolbox /launch-special-TPRM, you will see all the pricing there, and that's so yeah, Lyle, the third-party add-ons, I think today they're starting at, I believe $50, and then going up with this promotion. I would have to take a look, but it's going to be a relatively lower cost item. The reason there is a cost, there is a lot of vendors that are going to be coming into it. It's going to create a fair amount of data, especially with evidence data. So really what we're just trying to account for is the future storage requirements that you're going to have as part of your assessments. Obviously, vendors are going to be a little bit cheaper assessment than doing standard third-party assessments as well. So that's why we break them out between what you're doing from a compliance standpoint down to vendor compliance. But if you take a look at that link, that will take you to what the specials are. I know what the regular pricing is, but definitely take a peek at the specials, because it's about 25% off of each package. All right, guys. Well, that is everything today. This recording, of course, as always, will be put into the university so you can watch it again later. I appreciate all of you joining us today for our session. If you have anything else you'd like us to cover in the future, please send me an email to bdoyle@vciotoolbox.com. Happy to take suggestions on what you'd like to see in these coaching sessions. Love to make them for you. Obviously we can come up with a lot of great ideas, but if you've got something that you're really thinking about that's timely, love to help you out with that as well. If there are no further questions, I'll give you guys back a minute or two. I think we're just short of the 3:30 marker here, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. And if you get an opportunity, take advantage of the launch special. This will be the lowest price that we ever provide for our TPRM services. So love to have you come on board. And we will send out a copy of this video to all those that attended today with this link as well, as soon as that video publishes later today. So with that, I wish you all a great day and have a good rest of the week.